When I was a teenager, I was bitterly disappointed. My relationships with my loved ones collapsed because of the baseless rumors that my twin brother spread. The whole story left a deep mark on me, becoming a source of inner pain that I still carry. Now I am 26 years old, and I am surprised and bitterly watching how my parents, who once abandoned me, suddenly appeared on the horizon, demanding recognition and their share of my achievements. Our relationship with my brother has been tinged with inequality since childhood. His parents never seemed to hide that they gave him special expectations, believing that he would achieve outstanding success. I was credited with the role of a mediocre sheep, inclined more to sports and social contacts than to study. This continuous comparison has planted the seeds of self-doubt in me since I was very young. I watched my brother bask in love and attention, getting lavish birthday celebrations and lots of sleepovers with friends, while my interests and desires remained in the background. The only bright spot of my childhood was my grandmother. Only she showed me real warmth and care, brought small treats during her rare visits, thereby brightening up my emotional isolation. But as we grew up, this hidden favoritism on the part of our parents turned into outright emotional abuse. They began to mock my academic achievements, belittling my hobbies and aspirations, making me an eternal loser in their eyes. I was not allowed to take any extracurricular activities, emphasizing that my brother should become a role model and I should follow his path. But the culmination of this pressure was the events in high school. I was caught using Snapchat, a common activity for teenagers my age. However, my parents took it as a serious crime, as if I had committed something irreparable. They destroyed my personal belongings, removed the door in my room, depriving me of any hint of privacy. Meanwhile, my brother was adding fuel to the fire by lying that I was allegedly the culprit of non-existent violations, thereby absolving himself of responsibility for his own actions. His lies were accepted as the truth without any questions. It was then that I began to realize the depth of his manipulations. The brother skillfully played the victim's card, even going as far as self-harm, to give his accusations credibility. I was trapped in his intrigues, and my reputation, which I had been building for years, began to crumble before my eyes. Soon people began to avoid me, avoiding communication, as if I had become the bearer of some dark secret. I felt like the world I knew was starting to crumble. Over the years, when it seemed to me that my strength had run out from the endless struggle with lies and betrayal, I began to notice how even the teachers whom I once respected and considered defenders of the truth began to succumb to rumors. This feeling of detachment from reality, as if I live in a distorted mirror, has become my constant companion. Everything that was once authentic has been defiled by the malicious fictions that my brother wove. The words and deeds attributed to me had nothing to do with my true self, but public opinion was leaning against me. When the rumors reached the headmaster, I was summoned to his office along with my brother and parents. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking as I sat across from him, listening to my brother continue to double down on his false accusations, portraying me as a bully who allegedly attacked him in the absence of his parents. His words, polished and confident, as if they had been memorized, crashed down on me like waves, each of which carried another lie. He described the scenes of my alleged anger and jealousy with such verisimilitude that I could barely breathe in horror. It was like traveling into a nightmare where everything was turned upside down. My mother, crushed by his accusations, sat next to him, her eyes full of tears. She clung to my brother as her last hope, blindly believing in every word he said. His father also supported him, comforting and praising him for his courage in the fight against injustice. Sitting there, trying to speak, to explain the truth, I only heard the director's stern accusations in response. He stated that the school would not tolerate bullying, and despite my tears and pleas, he issued a verdict, suspension for 10 days. I felt everything inside me crumbling, but my words were in vain. I was helpless in the face of this injustice, as if I had disappeared from my own life. My parents, angry and, as it seemed, ashamed of this incident, dragged me out of school without listening to a single word I said. My father, without saying a word, returned home and immediately began to pack my things. The whole process took place in a blur, as if I was a spectator of my own exile. I watched him methodically stuff my clothes into a suitcase, showing no doubt about what he was doing. In his eyes, I was no longer his daughter, but the embodiment of shame and hatred. My father declared that he could no longer allow me to live under the same roof with my brother. These words sounded like a sentence. My mother tried to ask a question, but did not argue, did not interfere. Trembling, completely confused and humiliated, I tried to cling to the last crumbs of common sense, but everything collapsed overnight. The whirlwind of events dragged me deeper into the abyss of pain. Through tears, I turned to my brother, almost on my knees, begging him to confess the truth, but he remained cold and indifferent. His face expressed nothing but an indifferent confidence in his victory. Meanwhile, my father continued to pack my things, as if in a hurry to get rid of me. The suitcase was thrown into the hallway with a thud, as if he wanted to cut me out of his life as soon as possible. I begged my father not to kick me out, but he turned a deaf ear to my requests. His voice was cold, saying that a bully like me didn't deserve a place in their house. He mentioned that he was going to call Grandma to pick me up. At that moment, I felt the ground give way from under my feet, as if my world had collapsed, leaving me in a void full of pain and betrayal. When my grandmother finally arrived, she quickly packed my things and helped me put them in the car. Her presence was the last glimmer of hope. She made sure I was securely strapped in, and then headed to the house to talk to my parents. When I first truly realized the strength and support my grandmother had, it turned out to be a strikingly different feeling from anything I had experienced from my parents. She didn't just believe in me, she trusted me unconditionally, which set her apart from all those who rejected me. When we left the house, which was once the only shelter I knew, the pain of realizing the loss was unbearable. I felt like my childhood, shackled by distrust and constant accusations, had disappeared forever into the past. However, even after moving in with my grandmother, I couldn't immediately deal with my mental wounds. I cried all day, driving myself into an endless spiral of longing. The food became meaningless, the appetite disappeared, and an inner voice kept saying that everything that was happening was some kind of monstrous mistake. But my grandmother was with me. She was the only one who listened to my confessions about what my brother had done. Her kind words and quiet support were my salvation. I realized that I had at least one true ally who was always ready to protect me, believing in my rightness. And even though the world seemed unfair and cruel, I clung to her words, which sounded like a quiet beacon of hope in an ocean of pain. When my suspension finally ended, going back to school was no less painful. It was like being thrown back into a lion's den, where every step was accompanied by condemning whispers and looks full of contempt. My presence has become something unnecessary, as if I am just a shadow against the background of other people's victories and successes. My brother continued to act as if nothing had happened, his image of a victim strengthened in the eyes of others, and I, despite all my attempts, remained an outcast. No matter how hard I tried to explain myself, the excuses stalled against the background of general distrust. I became a loner, a person existing on the periphery of school life. At recess and in the dining room, I sat alone, avoiding other people's eyes. After lessons, I was in a hurry to leave, as if school had become a prison from which I dreamed of being released. Despite this, my parents have never tried to find out how I feel. My grandmother remained the only source of warmth and support, reminding me every day that I shouldn't blame myself for what happened. Her words were filled with comfort. It's not your fault, and one day everything will get better. These words became an anchor for me, which kept me sane. After graduating from high school with good grades, I was looking forward with trepidation to the moment when I could go to college. It was my salvation, my chance to break out of the clutches of the past and start all over again. College has opened up a new world for me. For the first time in my life, I felt freedom, real, unlimited. There was no more intrusive criticism or unfair comparisons. For the first time, I had the opportunity to be myself. In college, I found friends who appreciated me for who I was, not for someone else's image. This relationship has given me the sense of belonging I've been craving for so long. During this time, I rediscovered my love of writing, which I had previously pushed into the background because of other worries and worries. Now that new horizons have opened up in front of me, I saw an opportunity to turn my passion into a career. I started working as a freelancer, creating small projects for various clients and gradually building my portfolio. This part-time job at college was an important step towards financial independence for me. I was no longer dependent on my parents, and it was a real relief, especially against the background of all the emotional wounds they had left. With each written text, with each new order, I felt myself gradually recovering and healing from the pain of the past. Moving from one project to another, I realized that writing is not just a hobby, it is a full-fledged career that can provide me with stability and confidence in the future. My clients appreciated my work, and the professional relationships I built during this time became a solid foundation for further growth. Working on various corporate projects, I was able to develop my skills and find recognition in my field. With each success, I felt like I was gaining new strength. Thanks to my work, I was able not only to ensure my financial independence, but also to realize one of my biggest dreams, traveling. The world opened up to me from a new angle, and each trip became for me another step towards inner healing. When they heard my condition, the expression on their faces changed. They obviously did not expect such a harsh response from me, especially after such a long period of silence. My father, who was used to commanding me, expecting me to be submissive, looked startled. His eyes, which always hid emotions behind a mask of equanimity, gave a moment of bewilderment. He tried to pull himself together and asked in a familiar manner, "Why do you want this public confession?" "It's a family matter. We can solve everything quietly, without making too much noise." His voice sounded firm, but it no longer had the same confidence. My mother, on the other hand, looked worried, as if she realized that the old methods of manipulation no longer worked. She suggested that we discuss all this in private, trying to soften the atmosphere. "We are a family, baby. Why should we bring to the public what should remain between us?" She spoke with an intonation of concern, as if she was trying to bring back the old days when her words had power over me. But I was no longer the child they had once been able to control. I realized that their attempts to re-establish contact were based not on a sincere desire for reconciliation, but on the hope of extracting material benefits from my success. My father broke the silence again, unable to resist a sarcastic tone. "You're successful now, you're doing well. Is it really that much to help parents who have done everything for you?" He sounded annoyed. I felt that he wasn't talking about my success, but rather about his own regrets and inability to keep control of the situation. For him, it all came down to duty, to the fact that I was obliged to help, despite the fact that their help had once turned my life into a nightmare. Listening to their arguments, I became more and more convinced of the correctness of my decision. My offer was a challenge for them, a test of sincerity that they could not pass. I repeated my condition: if they want me to help, then they must publicly admit their guilt. I spoke calmly but firmly, realizing that this was my chance to finally restore justice, at least partially. Mom hesitated, her face frozen in a mixture of confusion and confusion. She couldn't seem to find the right words to express her feelings. "But it was all a long time ago, why should I remember it now?" Her voice trembled, as if each new argument lost its force when faced with my determination. My father, feeling that he was losing control of the conversation, tried to change tactics. "We can sort this out without these public statements." "What will they change?" "These are just empty words, they won't do anything. We admit that we could have done otherwise, but this is not a reason to put our family affairs on public display." His words sounded like an attempt to make a deal, not realizing that I no longer needed their approval or their quiet decisions. It was this moment that became the culmination of our conversation. I realized that their concern and recognition were just an illusion, spurred on by money. They weren't ready for me to put my dignity above their pretended desire to rebuild the family. My condition was simple. If they really wanted my help, they had to admit that their silence and my brother's protection had caused me incalculable harm. However, even though this chapter with the family is closed, its echoes still penetrate my consciousness from time to time. It's like a slight scar that reminds me of itself from time to time, but no longer causes the pain that has haunted me for many years. I am increasingly realizing that these trials, although cruel, have made me stronger and wiser. Now I am able to discern the true motives of people, no longer succumb to manipulation, as it was before. My life has finally taken shape, and I am firmly on the path that I have chosen for myself. Every morning I wake up with a feeling of freedom and gratitude that I can do what I love, work with people who respect me, and surround myself with those who sincerely share my values and support my growth. The time spent with my grandmother became a special ritual for me, a kind of quiet refuge from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. We often sit on the veranda, talking for hours. Her stories about the past and my reflections on the future are intertwined, creating an amazing bridge between generations. Her garden, which has become a real oasis in recent months, also symbolizes our healing and renewal. Every new plant that we plant with her seems to embody the idea of a new life, new beginnings. Thanks to my grandmother, I am increasingly aware of the value of real, sincere support. Her understanding and unconditional love have always been the most important supports for me in times of doubt and pain. She is an example of the wisdom that cannot be found in books or heard in seminars. Each of her advice is filled with deep meaning and the experience of her years. At times when anxiety about my family comes over me again, she reminds me that sometimes it is important not to seek approval where it has never been, but to build my future based on my own principles and choices. In addition, my therapy sessions continue to play a significant role in my journey to complete healing. I've learned to re-understand my emotions, figure out what they mean, and accept them without fear. The past no longer dominates me, it's just a part of the story that I'm no longer afraid to tell. Therapy has helped me build new boundaries and strengthen my confidence that I have the right to happiness and success, without having to justify myself to those who try to devalue my achievements.